The room smelled like old coffee and photocopier toner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Across the long oak table sat 3 men in suits I didn't recognize, a notary I'd never met, and my son Daniel, who was smiling the way he always smiled when he thought he'd already won. He hadn't noticed me come in yet. I set my handbag on the empty chair beside the door and waited. When he finally turned and saw me, the smile didn't disappear all at once. It sort of drained, the way color leaves a face when someone stands up too fast. His eyes moved to the woman standing beside me, my lawyer, Patricia Renaud, who had driven up from Ottawa that morning with a leather briefcase and very sensible shoes. Daniel said, "Mom, what are you doing here?" I sat down. I said, "I own 49% of this company, Daniel. Where else would I be? I should tell you how we got there. My husband Raymond and I built Hargrove Cabinet Works together over 31 years. We started in the garage of our house in Carleton Place, Ontario, Raymond cutting and joining, me managing the books, answering the phone, driving samples out to contractors in the back of a second-hand Dodge. We never had a lot. We had enough, and we had each other, and for a long time that felt like more than most people got. Raymond died 6 years ago. A heart attack, very sudden. A Tuesday morning in March, the snow still on the ground, his coffee still warm on the counter when the ambulance came. After he passed, I kept the business going. I brought in our son Daniel as a managing partner. He had the energy for it, and I thought I believed that he had the values for it too. Raymond and I had raised him to be honest, to work hard, to treat people fairly. He was 41 years old. I was 68. I thought that between us, we could carry the thing Raymond had built. I was wrong about one of those things. The first time Daniel mentioned the power of attorney, it was over dinner at his house in Canada. His wife Claire had made chicken and roasted potatoes. My granddaughter Sophie, who was 15 then, was telling me about her school project on the street, Lawrence Seaway. Daniel waited until Sophie had gone upstairs before he brought it up. He said it was just a formality. He said the accountant had recommended it. He said that with my age, he used the word age very carefully. The way you might carry something fragile. It made practical sense for him to be able to act on the company's behalf without needing my signature every time. I remember looking at Claire. She was cutting the last piece of chicken into smaller pieces, not looking up. I said I'd think about it. He brought it up again the following month, and the month after that. By the third time, he had paperwork with him. He said a notary had already reviewed it. He said it was standard language. He said it would make everything simpler. I was tired that evening. I had been tired for a long time. Grief does that, it doesn't leave cleanly. It lingers in the body like cold weather that won't turn. I signed. For a while, nothing seemed different. The business ran. I still went in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Daniel reported to me. We talked on the phone. He brought me into decisions, or at least he brought me into the room while decisions were being made, which I eventually understood was not the same thing. It was Sophie who first said something, and even then it was indirect. She was 16 by then, sitting at my kitchen table in Carleton Place, doing homework while I made tea, and she said without looking up from her textbook, "Nana, do you know someone named Beaulieu Marchand?" I turned around. She said her dad had been on the phone with someone by that name 3 times that week. She'd heard the name because she'd been doing homework in the next room and her dad hadn't closed the door all the way. I said I didn't recognize the name. She said he sounded excited, like really excited, more than he usually sounds about cabinet orders. I brought her tea and told her not to worry. But after she left that evening, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Beaulieu Marchand. I typed it into the computer. A holding company out of Gatineau. Real estate development, commercial property, light industrial acquisitions. Not cabinet makers. Not our kind of people at all. I called our original accountant, a woman named Frances Beaumont, who had done our books since Raymond and I were still operating out of the garage. Frances was retired now, but she still answered when I called. I asked her if she knew anything about the company's recent filings. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Margaret, I'm not the one doing your books anymore. Daniel changed that about 2 years ago. I hadn't known that. I said, "Who is?" She gave me a name, a firm in Ottawa I'd never heard of. She said, carefully, the way Francis always said things carefully, "I'd make some calls if I were you." I did. What I found took me 3 weeks to piece together with the help of Patricia Renaud, who came recommended by Francis and who turned out to be one of the sharpest people I have ever met. Here is what had been happening. Daniel had used the power of attorney, the document I had signed at his kitchen table over chicken and roasted potatoes, to begin negotiating the sale of Hargrove Cabinet Works to Beaulieu Marchand Holdings. Not a partnership. Not an investment. A full acquisition. The plan was to finalize the sale at a signing meeting, after which Daniel would receive a substantial finder's fee and a 2-year consulting contract with the new owners. My share of the proceeds, my 49%, had been accounted for in the deal, but the power of attorney meant Daniel could authorize the transaction on my behalf. He had not told me this meeting was happening. He had not discussed the sale price with me. He had not asked me whether I wanted to sell at all. Raymond's company, 31 years, the garage in Carleton Place, the second-hand Dodge. I sat with that for a long time, and then I called Patricia Renaud and told her we had work to do. Patricia explained the situation in plain language. The power of attorney I had signed was broad, but it was not unlimited. Under Ontario law, and Patricia was very precise about this, a power of attorney does not remove my legal standing as a co-owner. I was still a party to any agreement involving my shares. I still had rights. Daniel had proceeded as though I didn't, banking on the assumption that I wouldn't find out until the papers were signed. He had scheduled the signing meeting for a Thursday morning at a law office in Ottawa. The assumption, Patricia believed, was that I would hear about the sale after the fact, presented as something already done and irrevocable. Patricia filed a formal objection with the notary's office. She contacted the firm representing Beaulieu Marchand and informed them that the transaction was disputed and that proceeding without the principal owner's direct consent would expose them to significant legal liability. She was polite about it. She was also very clear. Then she called me and said, "Margaret, they've agreed to delay the signing pending clarification. But Daniel is going to push for the meeting anyway. He's going to try to pressure you. Do you want to be in that room?" I said yes. She said, "Then let's make sure you're ready." I didn't tell Daniel I was coming. Patricia advised against it, and I agreed with her reasoning. He would prepare. He would manage the room before I arrived. He would find ways to make me feel small before I'd even sat down. And after 30 years of watching people negotiate across a table, I knew exactly how that worked. I drove to Ottawa on the Wednesday night and stayed at a hotel near the Rideau Centre. I ordered room service and watched the news and went to bed at 9:30. I slept better than I had in months. In the morning, I put on the gray blazer Raymond had always liked. I picked up Patricia at her office on Metcalfe Street. We walked in together at 5 minutes past 10. The room smelled like old coffee and photocopier toner. I will tell you what happened when Daniel saw me, because I want to be precise about it. He didn't panic. My son is not a man who panics easily. That's something he did get from Raymond, or at least a version of it. What he did was go very still. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved from me to Patricia, and back to me, running calculations. Then he said quietly, the way you speak when you're trying to keep the rest of the room from hearing, "Mom, you didn't need to come. We could have talked about this." I said, "We're talking now." He said, "This is already settled. The terms are good. You're going to do well from this." I said, "Raymond built this company in our garage. We did not build it so you could sell it to a real estate holding company without asking me." One of the men in suits shifted in his chair. The notary had stopped writing. Daniel's voice changed then, not loud, but harder. He said, "You signed the POA, Mom. You trusted me to handle this." I said, "I trusted you to manage the business, Daniel, not to sell it out from under me." He looked at me for a long moment, and then And I will never forget this. As long as I live, he smiled again. That same tight, controlled smile. He said, "You're 69 years old. You've been running on grief and stubbornness for 6 years. This is the right decision. You just can't see it." The room was very quiet. Patricia opened her briefcase. She set 3 documents on the table. The first was a formal revocation of the power of attorney, signed by me, witnessed, and dated that morning. Under Ontario law, a grantor may revoke a power of attorney at any time while they are mentally capable, provided proper notice is given. Notice had been given. The second was a letter from a geriatric assessment clinic in Carleton Place. I had quietly arranged an evaluation 2 weeks earlier, at Patricia's suggestion, confirming that I was fully cognitively capable and that there was no medical basis for any claim to the contrary. The third was a counter-proposal to Beaulieu Marchand, drafted by Patricia and signed by me, outlining conditions under which I would be willing to discuss a partial investment in the company, not a full sale, not a dissolution, but a structured partnership that would allow the business to grow while preserving the name and the workforce. Daniel stared at the documents. He said, "You can't do this." Patricia said pleasantly, "She can, and she has." I won't pretend the rest of that meeting was clean. It wasn't. Daniel raised his voice. He accused me of not trusting him, of undermining 5 years of work, of refusing to accept that I couldn't run the company forever. He said things that I think he believed, and some things I think he said because he was frightened, and I let him say all of it without interrupting. When he was finished, I said, "I'm not trying to run the company forever, Daniel. I'm trying to make sure that if it gets sold, it's because that's the right thing, not because you made that decision for me while I wasn't looking." The Beaulieu Marchand representatives asked for a recess. They came back 40 minutes later and said they were open to discussing Patricia's counter-proposal. Daniel left the room before they finished the sentence. He didn't speak to me for 2 months. I had expected that. I had sat with the possibility of it in the hotel room the night before, the way you sit with weather you know is coming. I was 69 years old. I had lost Raymond. I had kept the business going. I had raised a son who had looked at what his parents built and seen a transaction. That hurt. I won't tell you it didn't. But Sophie called me the evening after the meeting. She said she'd heard her parents arguing. She said she didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. She said, "Are you okay, Nana?" I said I was. I said, "I stood up for something today. That usually costs something." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good." The revised partnership agreement was finalized in late autumn. Beaulieu Marchand took a 30% stake in Hargrove Cabinet Works, with strict provisions protecting the workforce and the name. I retained my 49%. Daniel retained 21%, reduced from his original share as a condition I had insisted on, not as punishment, Patricia had explained to me, but as consequence. His consulting contract with the new partners was dissolved. The business continued. The people who had worked there for 15 and 20 years kept their jobs. The man in Almonte who had been with us since Raymond was alive, who had cried at the funeral, still came in every morning. That mattered to me more than any number on a document. Daniel and I are not where we were. I don't know if we will get there again, and I have stopped needing to know the answer to that question in order to get out of bed in the morning. We have had 2 dinners. They were careful, polite dinners, the kind where everyone is speaking in sentences they have reviewed before saying them out loud. His wife Claire was warmer than I expected. Sophie sat beside me and showed me photos of a camping trip she'd taken to Algonquin Park. I brought the butter tarts Raymond always liked. I put them on the table and didn't make a point of it. Some things you do. Quietly. I still go into the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There is a new production manager, a woman from Perth named Donna, who is sharp and funny and who asks me questions I find genuinely interesting. We have coffee sometimes in the small kitchen at the back of the building that still has the same cracked floor tile from the early 90s that Raymond always meant to replace and never did. I look at that tile sometimes and feel something that isn't quite sadness and isn't quite comfort, something in between, something that belongs to the long middle of a life, after the big things have happened and before you know what comes next. I signed a paper once at a dinner table because I was tired and I trusted someone I loved. I am not angry at myself for that. Grief does strange things. Loneliness does strange things. We are all of us, at some point, too tired to read the fine print. But I read the fine print now. Patricia Renault sends me a Christmas card every year. Last year she wrote in it, "To my favorite client who did her homework." I have it on the refrigerator, next to a photo of Sophie at Algonquin Park, standing in front of a lake so still it looks like a mirror. Raymond built something real. I kept it. That's the part of the story I'll carry. I didn't win anything in the way people usually mean when they say winning. I didn't get an apology tied with a ribbon. I didn't get the version of my son I thought I had raised, standing in a conference room in Ottawa handing over something that wasn't his to give. But I walked into that room when it mattered. I sat at the table. I said the true thing out loud. And I drove home to Carleton Place in the late afternoon with the October light coming in low and orange across the highway. And I stopped at the Tim Hortons on the 417 and got a medium coffee. And I sat in the parking lot and drank it. And I thought, this is still my life. All of it. Still mine. That's enough. That is, I have decided, more than enough.